Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Friday, January 12th, starting perhaps a little bit earlier than I normally seem to average these days. Some of that definitely has more to do with the level of daylight savings time. Like I'd probably be at least 30 minutes more accurate or more consistent if daylight savings time didn't exist. Of course, that's not really a rant that anybody needs to go on because almost everybody agrees on it, and yet the people in charge can't get together to eliminate daylight savings time. And I don't think they really want to either. I think it might very well be a tinfoil hat conspiracy to say this, and so just take this with a grain of salt, but I think there is definitely either a subconscious or conscious effort amongst people in charge, whether that is oligarchs funding politicians in the United States or the politicians themselves. There seems to be some conspiracy to generally just make the average working class man or woman miserable. Like, the more you're ranting about daylight savings time, the less you're ranting about bigger atrocities or bigger problems. It would be certainly a thousands of years old trick to just distract somebody with something unimportant and get them all upset about that every year instead of other problems. Yeah, so moving on from that, I guess we still are doing the proficiency test on Yu-Gi-Oh! And starting early today is also going to just give me more opportunity. It'll just come down to whether I take that opportunity or not to work on my smart on-air sign. The progress has been very slow and very frustrating because I really am just banging my head against the wall trying the same things or slightly different variations on the same things over and over again and not making really any progress there. As far as the non-volatile storage, like, there's two functions in it in the non-volatile storage. You can save things as a string, which it's a zero terminated string instead of perhaps a null terminated string, which might be more standard if you're using just like a C++ standard IO. But that didn't work. Or you can save things and recall things as a binary object, a blob. And so now I'm trying to save things as a blob, but still not really happening. Not really working. And I have made some small progress as far as just doing yet another revision of the instructions. And then I've made no progress at all as far as the HTML that was working, I think, at one point, and has decided to stop working. One thing I definitely noticed is that there's a few places where I was just saying SSID instead of Wi-Fi name parentheses SSID. It makes a lot of sense to not use just SSID and label it always as Wi-Fi name, because SSID is a pretty crazy crazy technical term that a lot of people aren't going to immediately know what that stands for. It could stand for a lot of things depending on where your head's at. Social Security ID would probably come to mind for a lot of people. Selective Service ID for younger people who have to register for the draft in the United States. And certainly I imagine there's dozens, if not hundreds, of industries and special situations where somebody might see SSID as meaning one thing. I don't even know what SSID stands for. Let me just look that up, because I meant to do that. In the term of Wi-Fi, obviously the ID is ID. Service set identifier. That is a ridiculous name. And I think even from the beginning they would have already had wireless as far as Wi-Fi. So why wouldn't it be a WID or Wi-Fi ID? WeID, even WFID. That would make a lot more sense. Even if you were going to go with the 802.11 standard, 802.11 ID would make more sense. Alright. So we have this spell. But yeah, theoretically, if I could get the non-volatile storage to work, I think I would be a lot closer to being done. I should have been done months ago at this point. And I really haven't even, at this point, gone the next step where I would actually start to work on the encryption again. So that in itself could be another element, and I've changed something that probably is for the better, but at one point when you were saving settings, it would just say it's saving settings, and now it doesn't load that page up anymore. It just automatically disconnects and shows an error, which I don't know what I changed to cause that to happen. So there was one ritual summon there. So with any luck, I could get 3 ritual summons on this first game and then move to just playing regular ranked play. Of course, that's only going to move me to the next level of proficiency, and so then there'll just be some other fairly difficult requirement, I'm sure. Now this one, I believe, can attack twice, which is not going to help me any. Yeah, so I'll just end the turn there. Meanwhile, for the accountability section, I really have to admit that I spent most of yesterday watching just Eureka on Amazon Prime, which continuously, this is just watching TV in general. It is streaming. It's watching considerably fewer commercials, but not 100% commercial free now on Amazon Prime Video, and as soon as I finish watching Eureka, of which I'm not 100% paying attention, so it's not like I'm doing a fully concerted watch even and making sure I'm seeing every single episode, which in all fairness, I think you do that for very important shows like Babylon 5, even if it would be fairly difficult. I would say you should watch every single episode and not even start to watch an episode unless you are mentally prepared and alert for that to happen. But for more episodic episodes, there will be ones that just you could pay less attention to, and for the first time through you probably should try and pay attention to all the episodes. But that's not really how I watch most things when I'm rewatching them. I'll get bored, I'll get tired, and I'll just have it on as background music or background noise. So we're going to add this to our hand. See if they can stop that from happening. I've also been spending too much time I think in general thinking about a completely different program idea that I could never really implement, and I might even be able to implement it, it just wouldn't go anywhere, because this compression idea, if there's any weight to it at all, which very possibly there isn't, because at the end of the day I might be able to implement something just to realize that it actually is not actually compressing anything or saving any space. And the idea is evolving, and I'm watching videos and learning more about the current compression formats and algorithms. And for the most part, my idea, if it was going to work at all, would probably need to lean on existing compression algorithms to make sense. And so my idea, if it has any way at all, would be probably only help slightly. As the idea has evolved, there would have to be fairly tight rules on how it would work, and there's still a very high chance that what would occur is I would just have made a trade-off where the dictionaries used for compression are so massive, and you would just be downloading and taking up space for the dictionary that it would not actually save you any space for the compressed file, unless it starts to do something fairly dangerous. And I think there might be an argument to this, in that the dictionary would just not be included in the compressed file at all, where there's, as far as I have researched so far, there's no case of that. There's no case where you could compress a file and then you would have to have the dictionary as a separate thing, and as such, that means if you lost the dictionary you couldn't uncompress the file, and the file would just be effectively corrupted forever, or there would potentially have to be some kind of brute force idea around that to adjust it back. But some of the limitations of the current algorithms for compression are kind of old, like 2017 is probably the latest year I've seen as far as any kind of adoption. the dictionary sizes for like WinZip, WinRare, things like that seem to be, and I could be totally wrong about what I'm about to say, but they seem to be about 64 kilobytes in size, which is kind of a small size for a dictionary size. And even LZMA or LZM2 only goes up to like 4 gigabytes in size. Of course, for a significant amount of files, a 4 gigabyte dictionary makes no sense at all. It's going to severely depend on what you're compressing, and a lot of that is going to come down to, are you compressing a lot of video files or audio files versus text files? Because it's incredibly difficult to have something that large that would need a dictionary size more than 4 gigabytes in those cases. At the moment and in the foreseeable future. I did not quite get 3 ritual summons, 1 more duel, and we should have it. And even at that, if you were having to go onto the internet and download in some way 4 gigabytes of a dictionary file, which is where my idea evolves, is that this would be more of an online sharing of the dictionaries. That could just waste a lot of bandwidth for no good reason. Now, when you do disk-based encryption, the dictionary size of that could easily be 4 gigabytes, and that would make some sense. But yeah, and certainly my idea, even if I could implement it, I may just not know the math there. But at the moment, my idea is to effectively have these evolving, not De Bruijn sequences, which is a thing that already exists, but what I would call De Bruijn tables, or even maybe De Bruijn dictionaries, where you would have your longest letters in a grid, effectively, or characters in a grid, and your longest word perhaps at the it could be your longest word, or it could be your most frequent word too. Probably what needs to just be the longest word at the left, and then shorter words would start on the same row as the first letter of the longest word. And so then you would have inside this grid a smaller grid of a selectable table, and that would be the subset of a dictionary that you might select and use. But overall, this shared giant dictionary would just get potentially more efficient and optimized as more people calculate and improve on different tables, different ways to do it, which would mean that the De Bruijn tables themselves would have to evolve in iterations, and arguably that doesn't really make any sense either unless it's backward compatible. There's our third ritual summon. And to save space, by having a subset of a giant, ever-growing De Bruin, ever-evolving De Bruin table, you would have to have certain rules where a word is replaced by an XY coordinate, and then that XY coordinate is going to just work its way up a column until it hits a null space. Very often it's going to hit a spacebar space, and then it will hit a null character, because the word almost always will have a space after it. But you can't 100% assume that that would be the case. But the idea of a De Bruin table is not really that you're doing any real compression, so that's where the compression might be more useful, because if you have the letter A in a De Bruin table, which that's probably a terrible mistake because you're not going to save any space at all by replacing one character of A with an XY coordinate anyways. But let's see, if you have the word cat, let's use that example instead, C-A-T, and then space, you can't in the De Bruin table, as I'm thinking of it now, have catastrophe also lined up in that way. You would need cat, C-A-T, then you would need catastrophe. So this system only really would be helpful if they're for prefixes. And arguably, maybe there is room for 3 subsets instead of just one, where you would have a prefix subset, a root word subset, and a suffix subset of words. And that might lead to some compression. And maybe there would even be some room to break up root words into other prefixes and other suffixes and other root words, which would lead to potentially more compression. But the question is, how do you put that in a grid like idea so you're not having to create more of more references. You don't want to have to turn it to an XYZ coordinate at some point, or an XY coordinate with a length element to it. So yeah, those are things I've been spending way too much time thinking about instead of working on the smart on air sign. In a lot of ways, I have to admit that there's this either fear of success or getting anywhere close to being successful that I'm always having to fight through, or just this desire to quit on yourself, on your own project, on your own business. When things get frustrating, certainly it's pretty natural to want to stop working on something. And that was certainly part of my understanding and my desire to get the project done quickly. Same would be true for video games, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about. And it's certainly a reason why I don't play games that are super long for the most part. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an exception to that. Certainly, and collectible card games are an exception to that. But also, mentally, I checked out on actually caring about playing any kind of collectible card game probably 30 years into playing Hearthstone, which was probably 5 to 7 years ago. So, yeah. For the most part, a 30 to 40 hour game is about as much as I want to put into any one video game, and then I want to just move on. I think this is going to work. I don't know what happened there, but it doesn't matter. We got the proficiency done. That's it for ritual summoning. So let's see, can we get to this point here? No. You have to go back, and then back, then back, then back again. Then you have to click on this. It's just way too much clicking. Then click on this. And that gives us 10 legacy packs. And unlocks number 9. And what I really would have liked to see here is a case that there wouldn't have been a number 10. So, special summon a monster from a graveyard, can do that pretty easily. Activate the effect of a card in the graveyard, can do that pretty quickly. So, in this turn, if I can just get 8 out of 10 questions correctly in this stream, that would be good. Let's go with that one. Gallatin. What's the name of these cards? How in the world are you supposed to know that? There's 10,000 cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, this in the same column as this face-up skill drain. Let's see, you cannot be activated. Don't even really need to know what that card does because I knew what the other card does. Let's say this is a psychic type. Nope, apparently it's a warrior type. Not much. What's the name is? I think this is a Mark II. What's the name of this? It's gonna be one of these. Yeah, but there's like 3 different cards with that series. Let's go with that. That's... wow, I was pretty certain that was the right answer. Okay, so this is going to be a fairly tough test. 3 out of 10 the first try through. I think people would... you basically have to be a genius to know the names of every single card. Particularly since they're asking you names of cards that are of series of multiple cards or similar looking cards. So yeah, it's a pretty difficult challenge. Yep. If you did get this, there's not much information on it. The question was how much information is available about it. Undoubtedly there are people that have been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For 25 years and know these cards' names backwards and forwards and would memorize them. It doesn't help that a lot of these cards' names are super long and fantastical, fantasy made up names. and that there is a heavy Japanese influence, certainly in a lot of the names too, or just general Asian influence of the names. How valuable is it to even know the names of the cards? It really isn't that valuable, come to think of it. It'd be much better if they were asking me what do these cards do, because being able to identify the picture of a card yeah. So with this one, now we're getting different questions from before, which is also going to hurt. In most cases, when they're asking a question like that, it's probably best to simply pick the craziest option. I'm not even going to bother to read something that long. I'll just pick a number, and in that case got lucky. So this is a different character, I believe. Nope, it's the same one. Not that that's going to help me very much. So this time I've gotten 4 out of 10 correctly. And I'm still trying to do my best as far as knowing the descriptions and names of cards. They're getting deeper into the descriptions of cards too. Which, actually, this question I should have gotten right. In Ally of Justice in solo mode, which of the anti-war Ally of Justice weapon is considered a masterpiece never seen before? They're saying it's Ally of Justice Cataster. I should have guessed and the one that was a normal card, because the only normal cards would have had extra bits of text. But even in that case, the actual answer is the Synchro Summon extra card, which there is, I suppose, a valid reason to go for what would be a Synchro Summon card, because that would be a better card. In these cases, just picking the weirdest option definitely makes sense. Otherwise, I wouldn't be asking. Which of the following card effects cannot be activated during the damage stage? It says this one can't be activated during the damage stage. Which I don't even see a reason why that would be the case. And Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is something I've played quite a bit as a card, and I still don't have that level of familiarity with it. Which of the following monsters can be summoned when using Elemental Hero Flame Wingman and Elemental Hero Neos? Could have been Brave Neos, Shining Neos, Hero Neos, and Hero Great Tornado. All of which were options. I bet only one of these was options. And then I don't even care to read this with the numbers. And then what's the name of this card? It's Marrow Sandman. It definitely feels like these tests are going to just increasingly get more difficult though, and at some point it is going to start to show other cards as that were possible answers as the question, confusing the situation. This is also another example of all these cards have win in the name, but it's a slightly different win name, and it's the same character. Which, if Yu-Gi-Oh was going to go in that direction and have a character with a name like Win instead of, say, Dark Magician, it would need to do it way more consistently with a lot of characters. Even Dark Magician really only has about 3 or 4 cards where it potentially could be the same character, the Dark Magician not really having a name. But then Dark Magician also has Dark Magician Girl, and unless they want to tell a very interesting story as to how Dark Magician got transformed into a female form, the assumption there is that Dark Magician Girl is not the same being as Dark Magician. And certainly in the anime, there was no indication that Dark Magician Girl was supposed to be the same being as Dark Magician. Yeah, honestly, this is the only time I've seen a character by having the same name. And it definitely feels like it's a case where maybe in some later anime series, Win played a big role, and that's why she has a name and multiple cards. Or it could just be that in the randomness of what seems like a random cycle of animators that make Yu-Gi-Oh cards, somebody decided they wanted to make Win as a character and fell in love with her. Here we have yet a third question that we haven't seen before. Okay. Let's go. I thought that might be it. Now we're just seeing different one. Different questions yet again. Psychic Fairy, let's go with Aqua. Maybe the answer is always Fairy. Let's see. I think it was this one. So, it seems like we probably got a bump here this time. We're gonna have 6 or 7 correct. Still gonna fail though. So once again, we'll try it for the 4th time now. I mean, honestly, if you could get if you could get the ability to take any test 4 or 5 times just infinitely over and over again, you really have no reason not to succeed if you care about it. Now, inherently, in some schools, in some classes, you can just take tests over and over again until you get 100. But then you're under extra pressure of time as far as just, do you have the time to retake a test multiple times over? They're moving the answers around in random places, so you can't just know which location to pick. There we go. 4 attempts it took. And, yep. we very possibly will get this cleared today and get this bicycle mate. Not that I really care about it, and then it's just going to unlock a 10. Fingers crossed 10 will be the last as far as the proficiency. I could see them coming back in 6 months to in a year and adding some more proficiency levels, but generally it definitely would make a lot of sense to live with proficiency being at the level 10 at max for a while. They could go with proficiency forever and just try and ask us questions about all 10,000 cards in the game, but that's not really actually creating proficiency by any means. Even the test I just took, I guarantee you I will not remember any of the questions or any of the answers by this time tomorrow. Yeah. And none of that is really teaching you anything as far as strategy or deck building, which really should be the key focuses in any collectible card game. It's going to be, if this game has any strategy at all, you should focus on the strategy. If it has any strategy at all, you should focus then secondarily on deck building to satisfy that strategy. Yes, you want the art to be pretty looking, and you want the you want people to like the story and any flavor text you put in on the card. So those are very, very low priority elements. I don't know if I've ever, well, I definitely don't hang out with or talk to people who play collectible card games in the first place, but I will say in my limited amount of watching people on YouTube talk about collectible card games, I've never heard anybody say, boy, is that card game so ugly, but I love the play mechanics, because that would be something you could just address very easily. You could rip off a good play mechanic game with better art pretty easily. That's something that maybe even AI art will slowly start to address, is that we'll see people making their own like inherently making their own collectible card games based on AI art or computer assisted AI generated text for flavor text. There's one of the things that could be fairly helpful for people who have the ambition to create something but don't really have the skill to create something, which is most people, I would say. I have a little picture book story I wrote in a fugue state, basically one night a long time ago, and I have in my mind the kind of art I would like to see the pictures made out, and I've already written the general description of what the images should be, but I don't have the ability to animate it myself or any real funding to pay somebody else to animate it. Plus it wouldn't really go anywhere. I could probably self-publish it. I could probably even get a book on Amazon pretty easily. But I doubt anybody really makes any money self-publishing books, picture books, or any otherwise. I definitely would need to be something closer to a print-on-demand thing. It's questionable whether even the traditionally made style of books are being made particularly high quality. I think it is probably more of a case that nowadays most books are made incredibly poor quality to be as cheap as possible. And there is a certain limit to that too, in that you're not paying $2 for a book, you're still paying $10 to $20 for a book. And I wouldn't be surprised if the price goes up, not down. Because fewer people need actual physical media. Just trying to win here. No perspective, playing the old-fashioned victories. Yeah, I think at this point I've probably run out of things to say. So let's start covering the video game news. CES is, I think, either close to done or pretty well done, with the exception of Sony showing off some hardware things, basically just skins for the PS5, and there's now a rumored listing for a version 2 of the PlayStation 5 controller with better battery life, but I imagine not much of anything else. It doesn't seem like that CES is going to go back to being an E3 thing. In general, CES didn't have that much to show. There's some potential improvements on the monitor and TV front. Well, I would say that is kind of it. Yeah. The Matter standard still is a mess. As far as smart homes, they've seemingly given up on self-driving cars as a concept because they were just never going to get that to work. Not like self-driving cars have been a fantasy for probably 200 years, or for as long as the car has been around, and it's just not something that can be solved just with the current level of technology and intelligence that we have. A great example of that is there's an episode, or part of an episode, of Eureka, which came out in like 2007, 2009, so you're talking 14-15 years ago, where they were talking about self-driving cars, and yeah, what was a realm of fantasy then is still a realm of fantasy today. And a big part of it is just, for it to work in the United States versus any other country is drastically different, because a country like Japan could have self-driving roads with sensors embedded into the roads in just Tokyo, but then that would be getting away from their subway culture and their subway system, so why would they do that? Most other countries are smaller, can work much better with mass transit. Car culture is somewhat alive in Europe and the UK, but it's mostly in the United States with the large amount of land and roads. And it's just not feasible to bury wires effectively on the edge of roads, which is what you really need to do is bury a wire and figure out some way to power and send the signal through a wire as an antenna in between each lane. Or find some way to make some kind of magnetic paint or something. Some kind of paint you could spray on the roads. If it could be a liquid form and painted on, it would be much closer to having self-driving cars. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to jump straight to the idea of cars could see and detect and recognize what it's looking at. And it's just not a high enough level of accuracy for that to work. If there was a high enough level of accuracy for that, as far as self-driving cars, then Boston Dynamic in particular and other military contractors would have long since used that same technology to make robotic soldiers, because even in limited use, if you could have some kind of robotic soldier assistant device that could identify guns, could identify improvised bombs, IUDs, if it could identify people in general, just is this a human, is this not a human, that technology would be used. And maybe that technology exists in some classified form, but definitely doesn't exist as far as public knowledge goes. So yeah, you can't really have any hope at all that a car could identify a pedestrian or a stop sign or stay on the road with a large amount of accuracy, when the military technology wouldn't even have to be that accurate, because the United States doesn't really care about some robotic soldier accidentally killing a few civilians in some other foreign country. I shouldn't have put that down, but whatever. Should have activated it first, then put that down. So anyways, yeah, CES. Now noticeably, I do feel like I paid more attention to CES this year, either because I was just generally bored or because of E3 being completely dead. Whereas I've been certainly kind of obsessed with smart homes and gadgets for several years now, and I haven't sought out any coverage of CES. And I feel like the people that I am following haven't actually made as big of a deal about CES. So yeah. But as far as video games are concerned, nothing's really changed. The $3,500 Apple VR headset, which technically wasn't announced at CES or at CES, it was just announced at the same time to steal the thunder of CES, is not a video game thing. The monitors that they are showing off could probably run video games, but they're not focused or trying to show video game content. Like, there was definitely no demos showing off really amazing video game content on their monitors. I did hear about one device that had Bluetooth, I believe it's 5.4, which yet another iteration on streaming audio on Bluetooth might be slightly better improvement, as there's this slow crawl to Bluetooth finally getting somewhat decent at version 5.4. I know that one of the newest versions of Bluetooth does support multi-device broadcasting as far as the audio, so that you could have 2 or 3 people easily connected to one device with different Bluetooth headphones hearing the same audio, which that's been a problem. I'm not sure if Bluetooth has ever had a fix for the swapping and disconnecting and reconnecting issue, where one thing disconnects so that the other thing can connect if 2 things are in the same vicinity. Probably gonna lose here. Stole my card. May have been smarter. It obviously would have been smarter to banish my own card at that point. Suppose we also have daily quests we're supposed to be doing today, but I gave a brief thought to doing the Duel watch yesterday and getting an extra 10-20 gems, but yeah. Literally spending the minute to let that run and watch the Duel live would have been a minute that would have just gotten me let off track and distracted me as far as just trying to work on programming. And so I chose not to do that, which was the right choice. Things that feel like they're going to be just a minute can definitely knock you off rails, and then it turns into 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Speaking of which, playing Memento Mori on my cell phone is still going, but that is a great example of things that feel like they're just going to be a minute, and then they distract me for 20, 40 minutes. The Star Trek Lower Decks game, finally, on July 12th, has updated its levels and given me maybe 3 new episodes, which, okay, at some level that can work pretty well. But the problem with it mostly, and I've said this before, is that since there was at least 2 months in which there was no new content, and honestly it was less than 6 months ago that I even started playing Star Trek Lower Decks, so there's just not a lot of content in it. It is a great example of a really, really poor game that is 100% designed to make you watch a bunch of ads or try and convince you to spend a lot of money early in the game and screw you over completely once you get into the end game and there's just no more content. It's really, really bad as a game. And so I said once the new content was out there, I was probably going to finish the new content very fast because I just saved up so much of the premium currency that it was just really unlikely I would go any further. I would just burn through everything. So I imagine in the next couple days there are some time-limited resource gathering challenges, and so that's going to slow me down a little bit, but only a little. And once once I've just finished all of that content, I'm gonna uninstall that game from my phone. So then I'll be down to 3 games that I was trying out, with Memento Mori being somewhat automated, so it shouldn't take as much time. But I'm having 2 save files, it is taking a little bit more of my time than it really should. And then the other games are adult games. Kinkatuma, I'm continuously making some progress on that, although I think I've mostly done the main story there. And then 7 Mortal Sins Ecstasy, another adult game, still being very overwhelming. I'm doing some of the daily quests there, but I'm definitely not doing all of the daily quests available. But yeah, I may claw back some free time because of that by getting rid of Star Trek Lower Decks. Bethesda Games also trying to claw back some things. Here we have a pinned tweet from September 14th, 2022 of all of its high reviews that it got, Starfield got, by mainstream video game journalists, which in retrospect now are completely inaccurate to what actual gamers feel about Starfield. Starfield has been almost certainly the biggest disappointment of 2023, even though the actual expectations weren't being set that high in the first place. Go ahead and activate this so that I stop getting the prompt. Well, now they're saying on January 17th they're going to be putting out their biggest Starfield update yet into Steam beta with 100 fixes and improvements, with a planned release date for all players 2 weeks later. Here's some of what you can expect, and it looks just like they put a picture here. Additionally, the update brings stability improvements and numerous improvements, ranging from additional widescreen support, improved textures, lightings, and shadows in people. I don't know if I really want to spoil the ending of Starfield, but I did hear someone talking about the ending of Starfield, and it's hardly a new game by any means, but the ending of Starfield, speaking in general terms, does not strike me as a way of setting itself up to have a second Starfield, a Starfield 2, although with the reception Starfield has gotten, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to make a Starfield 2. If anything, I think it probably never made a lot of sense to make a Starfield 2. You could potentially make a different sci-fi game and call it something completely different, and maybe people will be willing to give that a chance, but you do have the danger there of, if it isn't completely different and if it isn't well received, people are just going to call it Starfield 2 in disguise anyways. But yeah, I think there is a weird situation, certainly with the Elder Scrolls series, in that for the most part you have your average person who's played Skyrim, and that's their first Elder Scrolls and only Elder Scrolls game they've ever played. Nobody really could easily go back to play Morrowind or Oblivion. People who did play Morrowind or Oblivion when they came out appreciated it, and that led to the much larger audience of Skyrim fans. But had Bethesda just said, we're going to make fantasy games, and they don't inherently have to be in the Elder Scrolls universe, that could work just as well. Same is kind of true with Fallout, is that you have a history of a much smaller audience of fans that played Fallout 1, Fallout 2, which are completely different types of games. And then you have the vast majority of people who have played Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas, which wasn't even made by the same company. So because of those weird situations, while it may not be the right decision, it's definitely worth considering making Bethesda be a company that just makes RPG games that are Bethesda style RPG games but have different names, can be set in a different universe, means you can create more of a narrative where there's a big bad guy. Starfield in particular really fails, I think, if the ending I've heard for that game is accurate. It really fails to name a big bad guy, and it certainly doesn't advertise a big bad guy. Like, there's nothing on here as far as a threat of an alien race or a human bad guy. Even if it was just going to be like a Far Cry series of games where there's a new bad guy every time, that would help. So you have a role-playing game where you can make yourself anybody, so the main protagonist has really no personality, can't have a personality. You have no big bad guy, so there's no antagonist personality. That sets you in a very terrible situation where you almost absolutely cannot succeed because there's no way to have a narrative there. You have to lean so heavily on secondary characters to an extreme level where even the secondary characters aren't having major antagonists. You could make a game, certainly, where the nameless hero is assigned to protect somebody, and throughout the entire story you're protecting that person, transporting them from one place to another. That's Resident Evil 4 in a nutshell, with Leon and Ashley. Leon on his own isn't particularly the greatest of characters, and if Ashley wasn't there, you would have very little to say throughout Resident Evil 4. I guess the question really comes down to, do they think Starfield can be saved? And Microsoft is definitely still willing to put some money after that. Of course, with all of these rumors around Microsoft, the question is definitely coming that as far as did ZeniMax, did Activision Blizzard, did the management at those companies somehow push Microsoft to becoming a very different company than what I think it should be and what it has been in the past? We may very well not want to have a Microsoft that is being nudged in arguably the wrong directions by ZeniMax, by Bethesda. Just gonna go ahead and probably win this turn, and I think that's probably going to be the end. Let's see. think we want this one. Not quite enough to win, but certainly close enough to have a very good chance to win. If I was going to fix Starfield, and when you have a situation where you've spent a lot of time on any game, I think you probably want to go the Prey route, which that too is a ZeniMax subsidiary that made Prey, by making a completely different type of game in the same universe with Prey Moon Crash, or you would go the more traditional route. This would be the other option, and probably where they would go with Starfield, is to add a very interesting, different feeling bit of DLC, story DLC, into the game. And you'd almost have to have it be free, I would say, and integrate it in such a way that you just have a whole new chain of missions from the beginning that take you in a completely different direction, have you flying to different planets, have you doing different things. And I would say it's probably a false red herring, I suppose might be the right word to use, from games. In particular, what is that game? No Man's Sky. Yeah, I feel like No Man's Sky has created this red herring where you could potentially feel like just remaking and working on a game and improving a game over time will eventually get your game into a really good state, and people will appreciate that. And while that did work for No Man's Sky, I think for a very large majority of people and games, it wouldn't happen that way. I would also potentially make an argument that things like Star Citizen had created some red herrings in these one-off successful games that worked on very different monetization gimmicks or very different styles of release. I'd say EVE Online is probably a great example of that too. Star Citizen, if it's the game I'm thinking about, has made tons of money and still hasn't actually officially been finished and released yet. Right. So apparently there was a issue here that they fixed. It's a shame that they run into these problems with certain individual cards, but it's not super surprising considering that there's so many cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Alright, let's just focus on news completely now, otherwise this is going to be another 4-hour stream. I still don't really know why Wednesday went so long. Valve apparently is beta testing a new system that would let Steam devs schedule daily deals. The system is currently invite only and will only enable selected devs to self-schedule the promotion. This definitely feels like something that does not make any sense at all, because it just doesn't feel like it would scale. you're going to have it. If this was to ever open up to everybody, which Valve would definitely, with their libertarian mentalities, would want it to open up to everybody, you're going to have so many low effort asset flip people scheduling their games to go on sale, discounted once a week, half the time. Like, you are going to eventually get to the point where there are laws in the United States where you can't say something is half off unless the game is listed as the full retail price, or 100% of whatever that half off is for more than half the time. And so then you're going to have a case where Valve potentially becomes like a half off shoe store. There's a very prominent one that does that, where it's like half the inventory is relabeled as being half off for half the year, and then the other half of the inventory, and they're just constantly cycling back and forth as far as things being labeled as half off. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some stores that just have like blue sticker, red sticker, yellow sticker, and on Monday everything with a blue sticker is half off, everything with a yellow sticker. Things like that could happen in a regular retail store also. Now, inherently, this also gets away from the automated control that Steam has done before. But Steam also has just done everything, and Valve has just done everything. So maybe they're just out of ideas as far as ways to sell things. It was my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that you agreed to allow the Steam algorithm and the Steam summer sales to discount your game by some percentage. And so you would just say, yeah, during this period on a summer sale, you can discount it up to 75%, and we're giving all control over to Steam and the algorithm. Notably, Steam has never really gotten into special sales for special people, where one person could get a game potentially for free or very cheaply, and then the next person would see a completely different price for that. I don't even think that there is a kind of virtual inventory element to it where you could say the first 1,000 people could download this game for cheap, or anything like that. So giving the idea over to the developers just doesn't feel like it would scale, or it would really even do much, because I imagine what's going to happen here is that you're going to shift more of the burden over to small time game developers to try and promote the sales themselves, because the fact that your game might be on sale won't probably increase the odds of it being highlighted on the front page of Steam, and the front page of Steam still really is the only place people would go to look for games. So the first part of Steam on the front page still probably will have the exact same sales you've always seen, although maybe it won't. Maybe that would change, and then maybe we would see more of a randomization of what is being offered, because as somebody who sees the front page of Steam 3 times a week, there's a lot of times where it's just Bloons Tower Defense on sale once again. It's just like the exact same games are being curated for some parts, or just being algorithmically decided to show on the front page for other parts. Now, to counter this story, there is also a level of negative stories that's self-earned from Valve, in that they have taken down a Nintendo 64 playable demake of, I believe it was Half-Life, where you could play a demake of Half-Life 1 probably actually on a Nintendo 64. They've DMCA struck that on GitHub. They've also taken down a Source Engine 1 build, I think, of Team Fortress 2. I could be totally wrong about what I'm saying here. Suffice it to say, there have been 2 projects that in the past couple days they've DMCA struck, and so it just doesn't feel like Valve is being as friendly to fan projects as it has been in the past. And there also seems to be a case where anybody who is talking about, I think it's Team Fortress or mods for Team Fortress, any YouTuber is getting DMCA struck. So now you've got the YouTubers who have the biggest voice also complaining about it. So yeah, definitely doesn't seem it doesn't seem like Valve is being as consumer friendly as it could be, or as fan mod friendly as it could be. Let's see. I definitely would hope, as far as daily deals, that there would be a significant limitation on how often they could do a sale. See, visibility on the Steam homepage and application tag pages will run for 24 hours, although the discount will be active for between 7 and 14 days depending on the duration selected by the developers. So by agreeing to put your game on sale as a daily deal, you're getting 24 hours of advertisement, which could be worth its weight in gold. Valve also asked developers who receive daily deal invites to choose a discount percentage that is at least as good as the best discount you've ever run in the past, if not better. It really admitting that people can use SteamDB to see if the discount is actually the best discount. But yeah, there doesn't seem to be any kind of limit here so far, as far as if you got invited into this daily deal system and you agreed to it, could you run a sale one week, then wait a week, and then run another sale the next week, and just incredibly game the system. And as this is being experimented with, whoever gets an invite is definitely getting an extra advantage. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says that there is a report that the mobile publisher Playtika is laying off up to 400 employees. The fact that we're past the end of the year and we're still getting layoffs is a little disconcerting to me. It will be even more disconcerting when we start to see layoffs after the first quarter and the end of the financial fiscal year. But I'm saying that very much expecting that to happen. There was somebody I saw somebody on YouTube, and I can't even attribute this, where the complaint was that there are just too many games in the game industry, and that's its major problem. And at a certain level, I guess you can make that argument, but I think that's probably 100% wrong. It's not that there are too many games and people are just spoiled for choice and thus paralyzed and not buying games because of it. The problem is that the budgets for AAA games that are trying to compete with too many games are way too high, where the quality of AAA games is only getting worse and worse. There's pretty obviously a plateau as far as increasing the quality of a game and increasing the budget of a game. So at a certain level, you should probably make a game that is at that plateau, just good enough, and at that budget to make it just good enough, and then you have to sell it. Then you should probably make a different game, which makes an argument that we need more games, and I would say we definitely do need more games of that ilk. Any more money being put into a game after that plateau is then just budget that has to be recouped, creating this cycle of impoopification is the phrase that's been coined, where they're adding more and more advertisement and more like in-app purchases, DLC gimmicks to video games to recoup the money that they're investing in the video games, because they put too much of a budget into itself. So it's just a snake eating its own tail as far as a problem. So just make less quality games. Here's a great example from Video Games Chronicle. This Sandland based off of this Sandland based game based off of Sandland from the creator of Dragon Ball, would not get many more sales if it was using hyper realistic graphics and had another $50 million added to its budget. This is a game that is going to very well target fans of Dragon Ball and Akira Toriyama, and that's as far as it really can go. Bandai Namco, probably one of the Japanese game developers who probably already have spent too much money on this game in an assumption, a false assumption, that it will sell very well outside of Japan. Whereas outside of Japan, I've never even heard of Sandland as the next thing from the Dragon Ball creator. And even looking at the visuals, it's fairly rough. Even from somebody who's seen Dragon Ball, it's the animation style and the character design is very, very rough to get into. The company Double Loop Games, according to video games, GameDeveloper.com, is closing its doors after 4 years. The studio co-founder Emily Greer attributed the closure to a very hostile funding and marketing environment, which is a fairly direct way to say that publishers are increasingly not wanting to invest into small independent, well, they wouldn't be independent companies, but second party companies, whereas publishers increasingly want to own the companies. Sony, for instance, basically wanting to own everything as the publisher, own all the companies. But then there is also certainly a level that if you are a second party developer and you're working with a publisher, the publishers have increasingly tried to get more money, squeeze blood out of a stone effectively, while not actually offering any better service, if really just offering a poor service. There is this fiction that people believe that publishers or advertisers in general can just make people buy money, spend money, or buy products, and it's just not true, particularly in this current economy where people don't have money. Like, you can't just highway rob people and force a video game in their hand in exchange for that. Noticeably though, this Double Loop Games is a great example of a company I've never heard of. It is a mobile video game company, and mobile in general has been just a very terrible platform, with there being very few games worth playing at all or even worth mentioning, and I imagine publishers only made that worse. Yeah, so not super surprising there. This is also not super surprising from Video Games Chronicle. Nintendo apparently has dominated the Japanese game sales for 19 consecutive years. The Switch led software and hardware sales comfortably in 2023. We've been following the sales on Gematsu on a weekly basis as far as software sales and hardware sales, and it has blown PlayStation out of the water, and the Xbox, even though it has seen some small success, it's such a small amount of success it's not even worth mentioning. So yeah. Now, one of the rumors as far as what the next Nintendo console is, the Switch 2 is what they're calling it, has been fully retracted, it sounds like, and was just made up. But in one of those two rumors that happened in the last stream, there was this mention that the next Switch 2 might sell for $400, which that is definitely a large price tag that would only go up, because I would have to kind of assume that the Switch 2 doesn't have an OLED screen on it. And yes, on CES they were talking about micro LEDs or micro LCDs as a new technology that's coming out soon-ish, in the next decade or so. So there is something that would be even more expensive eventually coming out. But yeah, if a Switch 2 came out for $400, you're still talking more expensive than the Steam Deck OLED versions, or at least some versions of the Steam Deck in general, and it's just too much money. Like, there's a big difference in people's minds between $200, $250, $300, $350, and $400. And increasingly, you have to balance out how many games are you really going to play on a Switch to justify the price of a $400 system. We do see some numbers here with just showing the top 10 games, all of which are coming out on the Switch here, and then showing the hardware sales, which that's the real comparison here, is you have 4 million in 2023 Switches being sold. I assume this is Switches, Switch OLEDs, and Switch Lights all combined, with 31 million over its lifetime, compared to the PlayStation 5, which sold 2.5 million with a lifetime of almost 5 million. A big part of that being that the PS5 was very hard to get, and then noticeably the PlayStation 4 still sold 75,000, and over its lifetime got 9.5 million. So if you added the PS4 and PS5 together, you almost get 15 million. Still less than half of what the Switch has sold. Xbox Series X and S combined only selling 141,000 this year, and haven't gotten but just about 500,000 in their entire lifetime in Japan. But even that is a very high amount. So if the rumors had been that the Xbox was getting out of the hardware business in Japan, that would have made some sense. And I could probably think there are several countries where selling hardware directly in those countries, it doesn't financially make sense. But for Xbox to completely get out of hardware completely is kind of silly, and it would create this weird situation where PlayStation 5 would only really be competing with the Switch, and thus PlayStation 6's would be very incremental improvements over what a PlayStation 5 is, because there'd be no other hardware manufacturer actually trying to push the technology upward. Meanwhile, the Switch 2 is going to do whatever it's going to do, and it's still probably going to be a fairly weak device when it comes out at a high price, if it is $400. Now, what these sales figures don't show you, and this has always been the problem as far as how it's collected, is they never compare software sales or PC sales. So, for all we know, 10 billion PCs, gaming PCs, were sold in Japan in 2023, or 0 gaming PCs were sold in Japan in 2023. You just don't know. And because of there not being any hardware sales, there also aren't any PC software sales. So for all we know, 5 billion copies of a specific PC game was sold in Japan, or 0 copies of any Japanese PC games were sold in Japan. We pretty well know it's not 0. If anything, following Steam in particular, more and more Japanese-only games are getting released, and that inherently has to imply that more and more video games are being sold to the Japanese audience on PC, on Steam in particular. And I do think that is the direction it's going. You also are not accounting for mobile in this either. So free downloads of mobile games would blow Tears of the Kingdom out of the water. There's almost certainly closer to 20 to 50 million downloads of something like Honkai Star Rail happening, and repeated in-app purchases might make way more profit than Tears of the Kingdom's one-time price. As hardware sales go, almost every cell phone that's a smartphone is probably also a gaming phone, so you have this unfair advantage in which, if you counted mobile phone sales in 2023 in Japan, those numbers easily could be 50-60 million as far as smartphones go, whether or not people actually play games on their phones or not. Moving on, Rebel Wolves has appointed the CD Projekt Red veteran as a creative director. The studio's debut game is billed as a dark fantasy RPG for PC and consoles. I feel like we had already heard this. The veteran's name is Matsu's Tomaskevich. Tomaskevich probably is how you pronounce that. He's been appointed as the creative director of the Polish studio Rebel Wolves. It was co-founded in 2022 by the Witcher 3 games and art director. So game director, art director. Which, yeah, increasingly they are creating this same sales pitch that we've seen before to imply that the important people, the directors, who probably aren't really the important people, have left CD Projekt Red and gone to a different company, and they're making a spiritual successor to a Witcher 3, and so you should play their game and not any new Witcher game coming out of CD Projekt Red instead. Which we've seen that fail recently several times. The spiritual successor to Dead Space being terrible on its own, and also having its lunch eaten by the owners of Dead Space, just making a remake very quickly to suck all the oxygen out of the room. The claim that the Left 4 Dead team went on to make a new game at a new company, which was eventually proven to be pretty inaccurate, in that there was only about 4 people working on that new game, when the credits list about 30 people, and that's always going to be really the case in these scenarios. I wouldn't be surprised if there's at least 100, possibly several thousand people that worked on Witcher 3. 3 people so far. at most being on a new team does not imply to me that there's a real connection you should assume there. And honestly, I don't know if there needs to be a real connection, because the dark fantasy game could just be anything and it could be good, and being stuck to the Witcher stories is not something I think most people care about, as Witcher 3 itself wasn't really that connected to the Witcher books. And so yeah, I don't particularly care if I was to play a game that felt and played somewhat like Witcher 3 but had a completely different narrative and completely different characters. As long as they're somewhat likable. Geralt of Rivia in Witcher 3 is way more likable than I felt in Witcher 2. Let's see. We'd already talked about this. Shuji Utsumi being named the CEO of Sega Europe and America amid a transmedia push. The subheadline here is that the company wants to capitalize on transmedia, quote, megatrends, which almost certainly means that Sega is very focused on trying to make more Sonic movies and spin-offs in that way. Although I don't think Sega can get very far away from Sonic. Like, the other characters that Sega may own the rights to aren't going to be that interesting. Tencent has completed a majority ownership of Dying Light Techland. Techland gets deeper in bed with Tencent as it prepares to launch its first new property in over a decade. Didn't realize that Techland was working towards releasing something anytime soon. And how can it really be first major property in over a decade? Did somebody else make Dying Light 2? Yeah. At present, its immediate future project is a fantasy action RPG teased last February. The project will be its first new property since Dying Light in 2015. Well, what happened to Dying Light 2? I know nobody wants to really mention it, and nobody was super happy with it. It wasn't terrible, though. It'll be interesting, certainly, to see if Techland's gamble paid off by adding just way too much content in Dying Light and keeping its fandom very happy. It probably has already paid off quite a bit, because I don't hear fans of Techland demanding a new game, but I also don't really hear them super hyped for this new game, although this new game seems to not have a name or a trailer or anything available yet. So maybe Dying Light fans will get hyped about it once more information is available. Meanwhile, as far as Tencent is concerned, it's not surprising Tencent wants to just, as quickly as possible, invest in as many foreign companies as it possibly can, because certainly it needs that level of stability to have investments outside of China, due to China's random regulations on video games. Meanwhile, the concern there, though, is that Tencent, at some point in the future, or even now, may get direct orders from the Chinese government to change video games. But fortunately, I would say we have yet to see any evidence of that. It is just a concern. But it's a valid concern. It's a valid concern as far as any foreign investment in any company. It definitely was the case in the old days that you would not publicly, at least, or legally, you wouldn't be allowed to have foreign investors in your company, or very few foreign investors in your company, if you were a United States company in particular. It would be considered fairly unpatriotic, if not downright treasonous, to allow a foreign company to invest into your United States American company. before the ideas of world trade were instigated. And honestly, that kind of protectionism mentality probably should come back in some small measures, just because there's just so much you can't control and regulate once half of all your companies are invested in or not really loyal to any one country. And there's really no such thing as an American company now, that they're all their own little countries of themselves. I don't want to get into too much of an economics rant today. IronSource co-founders are exiting Unity amid the mass layoffs. The IronSource CEO Tamar Bar-Zev and his fellow co-founder are stepping down effectively immediately. It's funny, they're naming one person and not naming the other. This is weird that game developers, the other founders of IronSource are named here, and it's several people. And yeah, that definitely feels like they are abandoning ship, but it does seem like it's weird that the CEO is getting named in particular, and you have to scroll fairly down to get the names of everybody. Wouldn't the headline be better? It's like all the IronSource founders or co-founders are exiting Unity amid a mass layoff, or shouldn't it be better to say in mass resignations? CEO and fellow co-founders. Weird to name the CEO, in my opinion. Not that weird though. Here we have yet another layoff. It's almost every story some days. Discord apparently is laying off 170 employees after getting too big. Discord's reductions come days after cuts were made to Unity and Twitch. Now, as far as Twitch's layoffs go, more information. I saw more information to show that they laid off a lot of people in a lot of the Amazon companies. And Amazon owns IMDb, by the way, too. So I found that out, or remember that. I was mentioning IMDb in the previous stream. I do get this weirdness where I talk about me personally watching Prime Video a little bit often, and it feels like I'm somewhat shilling for Prime Video, but I really am not. Prime Video is okay, but it's not great. I wouldn't inherently recommend it. And overall, Amazon is pretty awful, and I would kind of enjoy seeing Amazon.com being split up as a monopoly into multiple online stores, and getting out of several different categories of businesses. I can see Prime Video and the book sales and Kindles all being forced to be split up into different companies, and that being a better system, more competition overall. One of the things I did see as far as CES, now I just remembered it, apparently Home Depot is going to try to have their own line of smart devices, which could bring down the prices of smart devices and just generally create more availability and more competition on smart devices. If all of a sudden you go into a Home Depot and it's not just finding Lutron devices or Govee devices, but you're finding a Home Depot brand that connects to a Home Depot app that integrates everything together. I could see a lot of people who don't really know that much about smart devices, contractors, all of a sudden being able to get products consistently and put them in new house builds and remodels and use that as an upselling tactic or satisfying the actual demands of the people you're working for, remodeling or constructing. And there is perhaps more longevity in that too. If you build a home to last 100 years and you use it Home Depot equipment, there might be a higher chance that that Home Depot equipment actually lasts that 100 years, or at least a lot longer than a lot of abandoned smart devices and fly-by-night companies. Getting back to video games, Konami's Rocket Knight and Felix the Cat games are getting modern re-releases. I assume this is going to be minimal remasters, if any remasters at all are happening here. Re-releases really would just imply that they're releasing games that would run on an emulator. These are from 1993. There is noticeably very little relevance to Felix the Cat. No kid today knows anything about Felix the Cat. Most adults today won't even remember Felix the Cat. And I would say Rocket Knight is even worse in that case. I don't recognize him at all. This is almost certainly another example of Konami doing the bare minimal to try to make some money. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to take it, it does seem like it's kind of working, and it is better than just sitting on the games and doing absolutely nothing. But I think it would be years, if not a decade, before we could really trust that Konami actually started to care about video games and were actually being good stewards of their old games. We will see what the Metal Gear Delta remake feels like and how well that sells. We'll see if Silent Hill games actually get made and released, and if they're good. Those will definitely go a long way to restoring trust or rebuilding trust in Konami, but for the most part I still think you need some major changes as far as leadership at Konami before people would really start to believe that Konami has changed its ways. Here's that same story from GameDeveloper.com as far as this guy joining Rebel Wolves. And apparently GameShark, according to GameDeveloper.com, is going to return as an artificial intelligence, an AI-powered hint tool. The cheater has become the hint giver. What GameShark did in the old days would be considered and tracked and caught as cheating by modern days. So using the branding of GameShark to have some kind of AI powered hint tool is something you certainly could do. For older games it certainly makes sense, because something like ChatGPT could look up hints that other people had already typed on the internet and return those hints. But for newer games, brand new games, which is where most people would be looking for hints, it would be fairly useless as far as AI. Nobody has made any claims that AI is quick when building its large language module bases. That potentially could take months or years to build it. So if you're playing a game day one and want a hint, it's probably not going to be that helpful. Inherently, this is GameShark filling in a niche that should have been long since filled in by the game developers themselves, by there just being a hint system built into all games, something consoles probably should have implemented. PlayStation is trying to implement something like that, or has implemented something like that, but I don't think it's been embraced or advertised particularly well. I don't think Microsoft has anything like that as far as a hint system goes. But yeah, there are definitely sub-menus and option menus that should just be very standardized across the game industry. And in those sub-menus and option menus, getting a hint should be one of those options. Because there's really not a single game out there that is better when it doesn't give you the option to ask for a hint. Because by the time your usual gamer is willing to admit they need help, they're already fairly frustrated. And we definitely see that in the percentages of how many people actually finish games. Is that there obviously is a high level of frustration or lack of interest for one reason or another that causes about a third of players to make it to the credits at best in most games. This is a weird story, in my opinion, from Video Games Chronicle. Apparently, Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare is heading to PlayStation Plus Classics. Sony appears to accidentally have revealed plans to bring the game to its subscription service. This is not one of the Alone in the Dark games I recognize, and if anything, this clearly is not a game you would want to have release anywhere close to the re-release of Alone in the Dark, or the reboot of Alone in the Dark. Although this might be a case where it might not matter that much, because the reboot of Alone in the Dark may come out a month before this game comes out. But yeah, unless it's a case that Sony has exclusive decision-making authority as far as what shows up on PlayStation Plus Classics, this seems like somebody really dropped the ball if this happens. You would release Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare 6 months after it, once it's far outside of the launch window of Alone in the Dark reboot, and inherently that would have to be outside the launch window of every console version, every release version of Alone in the Dark's reboot, which could be a year or two. There's still not really a large amount of faith that the Alone in the Dark reboot will be anything anyways. The Alone in the Dark title is best optimized just by the title and nothing else. That's what it's mostly remembered by. It should be much better, and I hope that the reboot leads it down a path to be much better, but it is directly it was directly competing against games like Resident Evil, and Resident Evil just ate the lunch of Alone in the Dark, and they never caught up after that. Like, there should be as many Alone in the Dark games as there are Resident Evil games, and there just aren't. It never gained traction. Apparently, according to Video Games Chronicles, Bethesda's Indiana Jones game may have leaked. The Indiana Jones in the Great Circle domains have been registered by Lucasfilm, but that might also just be speculation on yet another Indiana Jones movie. We could take it as being also just a red herring. Inherently, I could care less if it was called the Great Circle or not. You have a book that says Ancient Circles here, and Forbidden Stones with a picture of circles, so there could be something to that. My slight concern, I guess I would get from that, is, are we going to end up investigating crop circles and aliens in an Indiana Jones games? Because that's not the direction I really would want it to go. The first 3 Indiana Jones games are Indiana Jones movies are considered fairly good now in retrospect for the last 2, but then the last 2 have gone in very weird directions compared to the first 3. The first 3 were magical items based on some religion. The last 2 were alien crystal skulls and a magical device, the Dial of Destiny, that I'm not sure if there was an explanation in that movie, because I haven't even watched it, as to how it was able to go back in time. I think it was just straight up science, and I don't feel like Indiana Jones versus a science gone wrong concept is particularly that good either. So what you would hope is that if it's the Great Circle, it's going to be some kind of Stonehenge-like investigation, and that there's something very interesting and surprising around that Stonehenge like location or discovery. There is inherently also just a question as far as what the game is and how it's going to play. It's being developed by Machine Games, the developers of the modern Wolfenstein titles, and that would feel very weird if it's just Indiana Jones running around shooting a bunch of Nazis. That's not really what I'm looking for in Indiana Jones games, although inherently Indiana Jones games really are all over the place, just like the movies are. There's basically 2, maybe 3 good Indiana Jones games, and then 4 bad games. About 4 bad Indiana Jones games. Let's see. We had already talked about this, but a retailer listed a version 2 of the PS5 DualSense with improved battery life. The new controller will reportedly last up to 12 hours. If you need a new controller, I guess that would make some sense. Otherwise, version 2 is probably just going to be more expensive. Improving battery life on a controller probably just means they crammed a bigger battery, and that it's not like the battery technology has changed that much. You could try for some more efficiencies, and since PS5 controllers are Bluetooth controllers, perhaps you could go with a newer Bluetooth standard. But the hardware improvements as far as efficiency on a Bluetooth standard would require the PlayStation 5 to be compatible on that higher Bluetooth standard also. Let's see. Here's the Video Games Chronicle article. The audio firm that published PR claiming that the Switch 2 was releasing in September has later claimed that it was guessed. So either Nintendo's lawyers got to them, or they totally just made stuff up, which they probably just made stuff up, if I was to guess. And really, there's no penalty for doing this. If I was just some random publisher, random audio firm putting out claims that would get me some coverage, and then coming out a couple days and saying, well, we just guessed that information, still get you some news. I was watching a YouTube video talking about how Waffle House basically does not advertise itself at all, and yet Waffle House gets a ton of advertisement just for every time there's a fight happening at Waffle House, and somebody gets a video of a fight at Waffle House. So yeah, no news is bad news in most cases. I would say in video games there is uniquely examples of bad news, but still, you can, if you get press, you get press. If you get coverage, you get coverage. Now, I heard some more about the SAG-AFTRA setting the terms or making an agreement with one company for 1 year to allow voice actors to sell their voices to be used in AI generated ways. So the original headlines made it seem like it was a much bigger deal in general, that they had made some contract with a large company, when really it feels like what this was is that the union didn't really know where these contracts would go, and they needed to establish a first contract to establish a foundation of a base, and it's for 1 year with one company, and then they're going to probably figure out what voice actors like and what voice actors don't want to see in a contract and negotiate for a better situation, which is often the case in unions. You can't just inherently go on strike and demand the best contract you're ever going to get in a lifetime as the first contract you're going to have with a company. Usually you're going on strike and fighting with a company just to form the union in the first place. Then you're fighting with them to make that first contract. Then a year later or 2 years later, whenever the contract runs out, you're fighting again to get a better contract. And it is just this incremental process, which inherently gets undercut when a company can just go bankrupt and form a different company under a different name, and then all of a sudden the process just starts all over again, as far as you gotta fight to have unionization there, and then you've gotta have fight to have a contract there. There is no real protectionism for unions in the United States, where all businesses must have union representation, or at that point, why even have union representation? Just have government representation to improve the quality of life and the wages and all of that of the employees. So yeah, it's another example that once you get into the details, it's slightly different. I think in part this was also SAG-AFTRA's own mistake they made, because they really needed to have better marketing and a press release written better when they first announced it. And they definitely seemed like they were just trying to hide it, and it comes off as very inconsistent when they were striking in part against AI use of voice actors, and then they immediately, a few months later, after the strike is over, agree to AI use with one company. Certainly haven't been really paying any attention to the release date of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, but it apparently has come out. As far as OpenCritic goes, it says it's mighty. The top critic average giving it 87 points, I guess, and critics recommend it. 94% of critics recommend it. Although inherently, we were talking about just earlier today how mainstream video game journalism rated Starfield extremely high also. I imagine there's probably not anything really wrong with The Lost Crown. That my main complaint, or irk, I really wouldn't even call it a complaint, just an irk, is that this is not Sands of Time, and this just does not really look like a Prince of Persia type character we've seen before, nor does the game look like it plays like a Prince of Persia game. I think that would be more of the concern. It may be an Epic Game exclusive here, and I'm not seeing a link to Steam. It is interesting in 2024 to see companies like GameSpot and Destructoid, Game Informer, still existing, PC Gamer, Eurogamer. Some of these mainstream video game journal sites, I would have expected they would have started laying off people. But yeah, these are basically all the screenshots I've ever seen of the game, and the 2.5D side-scrolling Metroidvania feel still feels very good. And this is an old story that I don't believe has been updated at all. So I don't know what you really take from that, other than that almost certainly was just a rumor that is not going to be acted on anytime soon. Let's quickly go through all the games of the last stream. Here are the ones that I was going to make YouTube shorts on it. Although I really am getting to a point now where, because I'm not spending that extra time either making YouTube shorts, uploading YouTube shorts, or scheduling YouTube shorts, that that there easily is 30 to 90 days worth of YouTube shorts that I'm either going to have to rush out or just admit that I've dropped the ball completely on YouTube shorts. The weird thing here, should I give this a chance? No, I think that it's just a little too low polygon. Is the situation is, I would say that I know my YouTube channel's just not likely to succeed. It was getting some more subscriptions from shorts and some more views from shorts, certainly, and it was helping. But if it's taking up my time and I'm trying to do something that actually might sell a lot better, which is the case for the, oh, this one doesn't support English. The case for the Smart On Air sign, it just doesn't really make sense to continue down the 10-year journey of trying to make YouTube successful. Yes, at some point, if I got a ton more watch time and about 300 more subscribers, I'd be back in the YouTube partner program. I might make about $1,000 every 6 months, which would be about $500 a month. That might be something, certainly, but it would require a snowballing effect, and frankly, it really needs a snowballing effect of more than that. Like, $500 a month is helpful, yes, but I would really like, if I was going to live off YouTube money. I'm going to give this a follow even though it's already mixed. Something interesting about the thumbnail. Does this support English? Yes, it does. It's probably a terrible Chinese game. $2,000, $3,000 a month would be a livable wage for me. So that would be a lot. And that is just rough estimates, not even counting for taxes. And that is also inherently assuming that it would just consistently be the case. There was a Reddit post just a couple days ago where somebody was making $80,000 to maybe it was even as high as like $130,000 a year, and they were still struggling horribly, or at least they felt like they were struggling horribly. It sounded like a lot of that was just where he might be living for that income, which you can't really control, or what he was spending things on. Although that is just a default knee-jerk response that a jerk would use too, is that you're just spending too much on McDonald's and sodas, and while there may be a certain level of that, like, there is also just a irrationality around those arguments too. Like, the vast majority of what people are spending on are bills that really can't be reduced, like water, gas, utility type bills, electricity, healthcare bills, which can't be reduced, childcare bills, which can't be reduced other than just not having children, which too late if you already have one. Mortgage payments can't really be reduced in most cases. Car payments can't be reduced in most cases. You almost always need a car in the United States. Yeah. So I guess the numbers are probably the same if I'm gonna actually spend time thinking about finances. I need my smart on air sign to either take up a considerably small amount of time, which I'd like that to be the case regardless, or take up more time and pay off it for itself by having $2,000 or $3,000 in actual profit. So probably more than $6,000 a month in sales, selling a device that at most I could charge like $50 to $70 for. 50 would be easy, so you to do the math on 50 times 2 would get you 100, so 120, let's see, like 120 units or 1,200 units. I'm not sure whether I'm doing the math right there. Each month, doing 120 even a month would be fairly hard. Definitely would turn it into a full-time job. This is an interesting art style. I'm not sure there's actually a game here. Seeing more good games today from the last stream. If I was selling 1,200 units a month consistently, that almost certainly means I need to hire somebody to do all the work, the packing, the shipping, and then that would just be money out of pocket. And so then that changes the equation and would require even more profit. If I could get it to the point where I wouldn't have to solder anything, that might work fairly well. And that is definitely a phase 3 idea, certainly, is to not have to solder any wires, and then I just have to plug a chip in and program it and print out some instructions, probably get a printing company to print out instructions. Then it would just be packing and shipping. But yeah, it definitely is the soldering of the chip that's the real concern, as far as that's going to take the most work. It's also the most dangerous part of the assembly, in that I can screw up the soldering and break the chip. Alright, well, for the last stream there, we've done considerably better. I have a long list of games here I'm willing to make YouTube shorts on, at least 15 or 20, where we've been seeing 6-7 games overall in previous streams. Let's see, so let's go through the news fairly quickly now. We're still seeing fairly high numbers in the big games. Our Complete Point really just has way bigger of a fan base than I thought it did. Baldur's Gate 3 still doing very well. If anything, this really proves that any stigma around Dungeons and Dragons or playing a Dungeons and Dragons style game has gone out the window. Lethal Company doing increasingly better. I did see a post where apparently Steam posted the actual revenue or gross revenue of these companies based on their expenses, as far as like the top 10 best-selling games on Steam, which that felt like they were giving a little too much information out for free, if that's really what they were saying. My chart still being my chart, in that it's showing more of a trend downward than a trend upward, and I just don't know if I can really trust my chart to be accurate. And so yeah, we don't even have a page of Steam open for some reason. I must have clicked on something. Video games news articles. Let's see how many of these we've done. Apparently Rocksteady now says that Suicide Squad alpha testers can now share their impressions. The NDA signed by testers partially lifted following a recent round of previews, which probably just means somebody broke the NDA and they didn't want to punish the people who didn't break the NDA and allow the person who did break the NDA to benefit from breaking the NDA. Either that, or you take it as what they're trying to hope you would take it as, a case that Suicide Squad is actually better than what I suspect it is, which I hope it's better. I hope all games are good, but I don't have a lot of faith on Suicide Squad's case. Hitman Blood Money Reprisal has been dated for the Nintendo Switch, which, yeah, I don't know why you'd really want to play any of the Hitman games on the Nintendo Switch. And Reprisal, I believe, is probably a Switch version, a lower resolution version of a remake of Hitman Blood Money. I don't know if there is a Reprisal that was ever released on PC. Let's see, and then we already talked about the date for Sandland. Did we actually say the date? April 26, 2024. We already talked about this. Nintendo Golden Sun RPGs are coming to Switch Online. I recall these games as being fairly popular, as far as this would have been the Game Boy Advance generation's introduction to a Japanese RPG, without having to delve deep into the Final Fantasy games. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if anybody has any real interest or hype around Golden Sun being released on Switch Online. It really doesn't seem like there's a lot of hype around anything being released on Switch Online. We talked about Discord laying off 17% of its workforce. We talked about this and this. Ubisoft released a Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown demo. If you want to check the game out before buying it. This week's free Xbox free play days include 7 EA Sport games. So EA Sports Football Club, Madden, NHL, F1, PGA Tour, World Rally Championship, and Super Mega Baseball 4. So going fairly heavy on sports. I wonder if there isn't a bit of a slump as far as people playing sports games in January. Let's see, a new mini console based on the Atari 400 has been announced. It seems to me like this is trying to ape the idea of the NES, Super NES Mini, although notably it's worth pointing out that the NES Mini and Super NES Mini basically have disappeared from sale. I don't know if you could really buy one from Nintendo Direct or if there's still some on the shelves, but they definitely are stopped being relevant very quickly. There was just a small burst of hype around them, and people who wanted them got them, and that was that. I think the audience for Atari is going to be much smaller than even the audience for a NES Mini, particularly when you have a USB one button, one joystick controller for Atari games. It looks like there's 4 ports here in the front, but I'm not sure if Atari games really ever had 4-port playing support. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. And then there's a keyboard on top, but I wouldn't be surprised if the keyboard there actually doesn't work, which could be a big problem too. Let's see what a 1 second, 1 minute video would look like. Yeah, a big part of this is really just going to be your nostalgia. Whether you had an Atari 400, and I'd say most gamers probably didn't have an Atari. This might be a great example. I guess there is 4-port playable. This might be a great example of where older game developers may have had Ataris, or video game critics may have had Ataris, and they've built up this false narrative that Atari is that popular. Although this is also just the current holding company that owns Atari trying to monetize Atari, and I can't blame them for doing it. They don't really have any other options. They either go into game development, which they should be doing, or they make Atari minis, or they put Atari on t-shirts and mugs and things like that and sell that as far as just swag. We already talked about this. Let's see, the next week's free Epic Games Store titles leaked. The minimalist platform level will replace Sail 4th. Love, the game is just called Love. It's going to replace a game called Sail 4th. But yeah, I haven't tried in the last few days to see if I can actually get any of the Epic Games past their CAPTCHA, but pretty much at this point I've stopped caring, and Love definitely doesn't look like a game that would make me really care about downloading it. Then we talked about this and this, and so that's pretty much everything from Video Games Chronicle. Let's move over to Gamatsu. Tekken 8 Elisa gameplay trailer is available on Gamatsu if you want to check it out. A side-scrolling horror game called Withering Room is adding console versions. It's currently in early access, rated very positively. From the thumbnail, it looks like a very different game than what it really is. It definitely feels much more like it's a side-scrolling horror-based fighter game. Interesting also that it's just not on my fall list. It did originally come out in October 4th of 2022 in early access, so it's been in early access for a very long time, which maybe means I just straight up took it off the fall list. It definitely has an American McGee's Alice feel to it, which definitely highlights how you could have a character that felt like an Alice from Alice in Wonderland in a horror game, and it doesn't have to inherently include American McGee or EA as an element. I mean, really, this does just look like they took the body proportions and the general hair and face of American McGee's Alice. Close enough that I have that feel, at least. A Toho Project adventure RPG called Marissa of Lyretop Mountain has been announced for PC. Yet another Toho game in a sea of massive Toho games that I think are popular. I guess I've never really gotten down to the details as to whether Toho games are popular or not. A Toho Dungeon Maker, The Labyrinth of Heart, has its second trailer if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. The game Cards RPG The Misty Battlefield has a second limited time demo available for PC. They're trying to build up hype around a deck building card game, but yeah, all I can really do is put it on the following list for the moment and see how well it's received later. The Rhapsody series 25th anniversary website has been opened. Rhapsody, a musical adventure, turns 25. This, I believe, is a JRPG game with musical elements to it. Let's see. The Rhapsody, a musical adventure, first game. Yep. Feels very much like Paper Mario or Mario RPG, not Paper Mario so much. It is rated very positively, but not really a lot of people playing it. It definitely feels like it's an example of a game that Japanese companies thinks would sell more. Let's see, there's also Rhapsody 2 and Rhapsody 3 as games. Let's see how that goes. Rhapsody 2 being slightly different. And this is from NIS America, so it seems to have similar feelings to their major type of character. I want to say Danganronpa, but that's not the name of it. What is it? Let's see. Not the Trail series. What am I thinking of? Yeah, Disgaea. Definitely has some Disgaea feeling to it. And there's 2 Rhapsody 2s. That's the... No, there's 1 Rhapsody 2 and 1 Rhapsody 3. If anything, it feels like the reception of 2 and 3 are worse than the first game, in that people maybe played the first game and liked it, and then the second games seem to be more traditionally cheaply animated, lower resolution. Feel like games that would have been on a Game Boy instead of on a proper console or like a Nintendo 64. So there's a shift in art style there. Now, what do we take from them opening the 25th anniversary site? I don't know. One would hope that they maybe are going to remake or remaster 2 and 3 in particular, or make a sequel. I don't know what you could really do though to make it super popular other than maybe ride on the success of the re-releases of Mario RPG, which there's probably a lot of JRPGs that could try and ride on the success of Mario RPG, but they're going to be late to the party even now, if they did. Let's see, Wulong Fallen Dynasty Complete Edition launches February 6th. Let's see. Complete Edition, as far as Wulong Final Dynasty on Steam, it's mixed reviews. So a Complete Edition probably wouldn't change too much other than making it just cheaper to own everything. I don't know if this Complete Edition is really coming to PC as much as it might just be coming to consoles. A game called Oblivion Override launches January 25th. Let's see what that looks like. Well, apparently we've already seen it because it's on the wish list. So I'm just waiting for this game to come out of early access, effectively. Rated extremely positively. It's been since June of 2023. That's yet another example of too many games releasing in early access and then taking way too long to come out of early access. Yeah, there's 2 types of early access pretty obviously. There's real early access where you're actually working on the game. And maybe I should use early access as a indicator in particular of how long it's taken me to program my smart on-air sign. I'm still doing better than a lot of game developers who have games in early access from years, and if not half a decade ago. But then there is also faker early access where people are just putting their game in early access as a way of advertising the game and then using coming out of early access as a way to advertise the game again. And that kind of fake early access, I think, creates a false impression that games should be in early access for a month or two before they're released, and then they should be released, which doesn't happen in real early access most of the time. Moving on, Gamatsu says Cyberstep has announced a visual novel featuring YouTuber music group Muropaka for PS4 and 5 and the Switch and the PC, iOS, and Android. I would think it would be helpful if they could show me a little bit more of who Muropaka is. A virtual VTuber or a virtual YouTuber music group. Almost certainly this is a Japanese YouTube music group that has not gotten a lot of coverage outside of Japan, because I definitely don't recognize it. Let's see. Unicorn Overload has Yosef's Guide to Exploration trailer if you want to check that out. The Golden Sun and Golden Sun The Lost Age are coming out January 17th on Switch Online. Persona 3 has the Cities Facilities trailer. Sandland launches April 25th in Japan and then April 26th worldwide. That definitely feels very Japanese to release the game one day early in Japan, just out of a national patriotism, pride, whatever you want to call it. Let's see. Apparently Game Freak has trademarked Panned Land in Japan. This might be Project Bloom or something else. Panned Land sounds like a land built around pandas. The symbols here look like a lot of those symbol Pokemon from a very, very early Pokemon game. This might be an effort by Game Freak to make something like Pokemon without actually having to call it Pokemon and then give half the money to Nintendo and the Pokemon Company. Also might be an effort for Game Freak to make a game that isn't a Pokemon game, because they are at the risk increasingly of not being the Pokemon developer anymore. It would make a lot of sense for the Pokemon Company, which is in part owned by Nintendo, to have a different second-party developer develop Pokemon games and use better talent and a better engine to make Pokemon games. Although I did hear somebody singing the praises of the most recent Pokemon games, despite the many bugs and the terrible graphics in it. Let's see, Rocket Knight Adventures Resparked Collection for the PS4 and 5 and Switch and PC was announced. Can we get to a Steam link is the question. Looking at the screenshots though, it definitely doesn't look like there's even a relatively decent amount of emulation going on. There's just black bars on the left and right. And you can see on these screenshots in particular, the vast majority in this press release are just the same old, different sized box art. But yeah, here you can see it's just black bars on the left and right, which that doesn't scream quality by any means. Yeah, no Switch link on this story. Felix the Cat Collection also announced for the PS4 and 5 and Switch, possibly not coming to PC at all. No screenshots on this one either. I did play an NES Felix the Cat game for a brief while. I think I rented it for a weekend or so, and it's pretty awful. A lot of non-Nintendo games for the NES were pretty awful. A game called Day Day Live, Rin Dystopia, is coming to the West in 2024 for PC, which is a weird name for the thumbnail. Definitely doesn't feel like it really matches The actual screenshots here much more colorful, but I wouldn't be surprised if the story is perhaps more dark than the screenshots are showing here. These screenshots don't even really seem like they have any text over them, so this could be anything. This is a follow-up to Day Live Rio Reincarnation, which is based off of a light novel and anime series, which is where I recognize the name Day Live from. Although I haven't read the light novel or watched the anime. See, Trigger Heart Excelia for Switch is coming to the West in 2024. We're getting quite a bit of Japanese news today on Gematsu. And then a game called The Last Time I Saw You has been delayed to fall, which I'm not sure I've heard about this one before. It's not on the follow list. It definitely has a different kind of animation style to it. I'd almost call this like Taiwanese. It's weird. It supports English, Spanish, and Japanese. Yeah, it feels a little bit more Taiwanese or Korean in its animation style, or perhaps an animation style you would have expected from Japanese animators in the past, or maybe just a different experimentation in the way the characters are designed. We already talked about Hitman Blood Money Reprisal for Switch. And then Banisher's Ghost of New Eden Love, Death, and Sacrifice trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. Jujutsu Kaisen Clash Characters trailer for 2 new characters is available. This is yet another one of these Japanese games where they're going to advertise themselves about once a week for several weeks until the game actually comes out. Games with lots of characters could certainly do that. It's kind of funny that the Smash Brothers games don't do that. You could really have an advertisement around a character every week, even if it was an old character in a new Smash Brothers game. We had already talked about this. And then the Famitsu sales are here, although it doesn't seem like this is from the end of 2023 sales numbers more than just they've updated this in a weird way. The original story is here with the first 10 sales and hardware sales. Now they've updated it for the full 30. And Marvel Spider-Man is the only PlayStation 5 game in the top 13 list, and then Baldur's Gate 3 for the PS5 is in 14th spot, and then it's Nintendo Switch all the way down to the 30th spot, so ending very heavily. And remember, this would be in that Christmas season, even if the Japanese aren't super into buying gifts or celebrating Christmas. I think when you're talking Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch games, I wouldn't be surprised if the modern generation of Japanese people do celebrate some gift-giving Christmas element and buy more video games because of that. They may just get sales during that time and buy more games for that reason, just because it's the end of the year and the Christmas part may be ignored completely. If anything, I would say what is more surprising here is you have Spy X Anna Operation Memories doing pretty well in the 13th spot. It is based on a popular anime, but the fact that it's beating Baldur's Gate 3 for this first week is fairly shocking. almost certainly I would expect Baldur's Gate 3 to continue to have sales in future weeks, whereas Spy X Anna will probably fall down and not be in the top 30 in a couple of weeks. And then hardware sales just don't feel like they've been updated at all. And yeah, the way this has been updated is different than the way Gematsu usually updated it, because they have the 25th through the 31st. They took a week off. And in this list, Baldur's Gate 3 is in the 23rd spot. Spy X Anna made it to the 25th spot, so it did fall down. But so did Baldur's Gate. And there were no new games released seemingly between the 25th and the 31st. Was this update was between the 18th and the 24th, and this original post was the 18th with limited information. But no seeming updates as far as hardware sales, but we had already talked about that anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I do suspect by the end of 2024 we'll stop seeing new 2DS sales being included. And yeah, still no hardware for PCs or cell phones being included or counted, and no PC software sales being counted. Moving on, Konosuba God's Blessing on This Wonderful World, Love for These Clothes of Desire launches February 8th in the West. This is one of 2 or 3 different games that you could easily confuse in your mind. The Konosuba game series versus the Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in the Dungeon series, versus even like I want to say Gun Gal Online is the name of the series, but that's not it. Yeah, I forget the name of it. Sword Art Online is the name. Yeah, the Sword Art Online series is another game series based on an anime. Looks like there might be some lewd, but probably not nude content in this game. So we'll see if there's any censorship or not, or if there's a good reception or not. Increasingly for me, it definitely feels like there's just not as much of a reason to play any kind of Japanese RPG game based off of an anime, because by the time I get around to it, the anime is just not going to be relevant anymore. Konosuba is a pretty old series even now, and I think for your average fan of Konosuba, they probably are going to have less interest in the game by the time it comes out to the West. Moving on, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink for the PS5 and PS4 has a demo launching January 12th. There are more updates and more announced in this article if you want to read this article. And then Wizman's World Retry launches May 30th for the PS4 and 5 and Switch in Japan. And then it's later coming out in 2024 for Xbox One and PC. Although that still would imply probably in Japan. This looks like it's a RPG game of some sort. I'm not sure that there's anything particularly too special around it. It does seem like maybe there's some fairy characters that play a role here. It is an interesting thought, certainly, in that you don't have too many games or too many stories where you're summoning fairies or playing with fairies. Really, I guess fairies in fiction are always kind of fairly limited in when they show up. You have like Tinkerbell from the Peter Pan series being the only fairy that I imagine most people could even mention for some decades. There's of course like Midsummer's Night Dream and Puck and the fairies in that, but fewer people are gonna really remember that or know anything about it. There was a couple of cartoons with fairy-like creatures, but they've never really become super popular. But perhaps that's for the better, because it then creates a situation where you have characters that are more consistent. They're not going up and down in popularity, they're just an option around there. But you'd think for every like fantasy game, every RPG, Japanese RPG fantasy game that exists, there would be a fairy here and there in every single game. That there would be fairies in the Final Fantasy universe. I don't think there really are. There are fairies in the Zelda games, but they are tiny little spots of light in most of the games. I guess you do see a queen fairy in Breath of the Wild and probably in Tears of the Kingdom. Anyways, we need to hurry up, otherwise this is going to go too long. Actually, we'll probably end just at 3 hours. RPG Maker with, which I'm not sure what with actually stands for, has added a PS4 and PS5 version, which does take it away from just feeling like it was a Switch version only. It's still going to be a console version of RPG Maker, inspiring people to make video games with RPG Maker that are inherently going to look like RPG Maker games and thus not that good. Let's see, Mario vs. Donkey Kong Pieces of the Puzzle trailer is available. This will be the next Mario Nintendo game to come out, I would imagine, on February 16th. There is certainly a lineup here in that there's a decent number of games that I suspect are being rushed out for the Nintendo Switch before a Nintendo Switch 2 gets announced. But it is going to create this weird situation where, whether it's intentional or not, you're going to have a lot of games and new games that you've bought and could play on your Switch 1 that would potentially not be playable on a Switch 2 if it's not backward compatible, which would be crazy, but it might happen. Or you're going to have spent so much on video games that buying a Switch 2, particularly if it's like $400, it's just not going to be financially viable. But maybe that's the intention. Maybe Nintendo has looked at the numbers and said, we're only going to have a small percentage of Switch 2s available for purchase, so let's satisfy the market with games and have people just happy with games, announce the Switch 2 in the first quarter or second quarter of 2024, release it then, and then hopefully have enough available for Christmas, but also make it feel like the Switch 2 is very much like a PlayStation 5 Pro, something that you might want but don't inherently have to get, particularly if all the games that start getting released after the Switch 2 is released are still backward compatible and playable on the Switch 1. But on the other hand, if that was the case, that Nintendo was trying to just satisfy the market because they know there's not going to be that many Switch 2s available initially, they would be putting out more newer games instead of remakes of old games. It much more feels like they are just rushing to release remakes that were in the works, things they're just trying to finish things and get everything off their plate to focus on the Switch 2, which, yeah. Might very well mean that the Switch 2 is not backward compatible, or it might very well mean that they've just got a lot of new gimmicks they're going to do in Switch 2 style games. If the Switch 2, say, worked with a VR headset or something, or just didn't work with Joy-Cons, or didn't work with the Wiimote motions at all, which I could see it doing that more than anything, is that it would just be like a Switch Lite where the controllers are built into the screen. You can't detach them, you can't point them, you're not doing any kind of motion gimmicks. I could see all the Wii and Wii U games that required a Wiimote to really play them not being compatible with the Switch 2, and then some Switch games being compatible, but maybe not all. But yeah, that is mostly just baseless speculation, so it's better just to wait and see. Apparently, a dinosaur-themed first-person shooter called Sun and Bone has been announced for the PS5. It's from the studio behind Quantum Error, due out in 2024. Which that could be interesting. But in a lot of ways, it feels like what they're doing here is they're making a Turok game while getting away from actually calling it Turok or having a Native American as the main protagonist, which at a certain level, having a non-Native American as the main protagonist might be a safe choice, but it also might cause some controversy. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they just don't have the rights to Turok, so they're making something like Turok with a different protagonist character. Yeah. And then Stumble Guys for Xbox One and Series launches January 23rd, and I think that is straight up our last Gamatsu article. There we can see game developers website was down for a second. Apparently the Final Fantasy XVI's Naoki Yoshida thinks the franchise needs newer hands. Children are the franchise's future. I would assume, let's just go ahead and open this. This is an argument that younger players should be playing it, not an argument that younger developers should be developing it. Inherently, the reception and the treatment from Final Fantasy VI's developers to its audience has been pretty poor. In both cases. Well, the treatment was poor and then the reception was poor. We talked about, I think, pretty much all of these. Let's see this. This one we didn't talk about. And maybe we didn't talk about this one. So we'll see those news stories, and then that will just be the end of it for today. Apparently Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and Alan Wake have led the 2024 DICE Award nominations, which perhaps is not super actionable in that you can look at the nominations of the games, but you won't know who really won them until the DICE Awards actually happened. Perhaps too many awards too close to together, because it feels like the BAFTAs were just 3 or 4 weeks ago. And then Visaya Games Vinba leads the finalist for the 2024 IGF Awards, Independent Games Festival Awards. And clearly, when you have 2 award announcements overlapping, that is a real problem. The Independent Games Festival having a very different selection of games that they're capable of actually awarding because they are only including companies that are generally considered to be independent, or actually are independent. Although what does independent really mean in a lot of times? Seems like you can be fairly independent and then have individual angel investors in your company pretty easily. And then, yeah, let's see what he means here with the younger hands. Quote, it would be good to look to the future and bring in a younger generation. Young developers and their youthful sensibilities would lead a new mainline installment that suits today's worlds. So, yeah, he's saying new developers, which is maybe a way of him trying to force himself into retirement, or it might be a way of him just trying to get younger talent that he can exploit more and pay less, which maybe that's the case too. Let's see. Do we have anything else we really need to talk about? Nope. Really don't. So that'll be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. Thank you for watching.